screens, not full screen, if that's intentional
That's
or
okay.
not.
Yeah, that's totally intentional. Yeah, because I'm going to be jumping in and out of the presentation. Thank you though for the shout. Yeah, so I wanted to go through the agenda here. So we're going to briefly introduce ourselves, and you'll have a chance to fill out a poll and introduce yourself, get to know who else is on the Zoom call here with you. And then the bulk of the presentation is going to be going through the role that you have been recruited to do and will be serving on the editorial board, including importantly, all of the resources that we have at your disposal in order to carry out this role. I will warn you, this is going to be kind of like a flood of information, but the point of this is not necessarily to have you memorize all of the content in these resources, but to showcase what they look like so that when you do need to access these resources, you know where to find them and you know where to find the information that you're looking for. We're going to have a Q&A session, and then we're going to wrap it all up, summarize everything, again, where to find this information. And then there's going to be an optional breakout room session at the end if you'd like to hang back and kind of socialize with your colleagues on the editorial board. Right. So going in and starting with myself. Hi, I'm Dina Emerson. You will probably be receiving a lot of emails from me. I am the editorial board experience manager on the editorial board services team. And we are a team at PLOS that works across all of the journals, and we are solely dedicated to the editorial boards. So that means recruiting, filling any expertise gaps at the journals, and then getting into the experience side of things, making sure that you have all of the resources at your disposal to do the role. And then of course, providing support throughout your tenure. And then eventually when you need to resign, helping process that as well. And my background is in wildlife biology and parasitology. So I'm kind of what they call a reformed academic here at PLOS, where we kind of went down the path, but then decided not to pursue that as an ultimate career, but still really love science and being a part of it. And passing it off to Bex.
Thanks very much, Dina. I think that latter describes me quite well as a lapsed biochemist. So I'm Bex Kirk. I'm Associate Editorial Director here at PLOS. My remit's quite broad. I manage the in-house teams for PLOS Biology and PLOS Medicine, but I also work really closely with the editors-in-chief and the teams to consider the editorial policy and the ethics for all the journals that we call the community journals. That is essentially encompassing all of the field-specific and selective titles that we publish here at PLOS, and you will be one of the academic editor team for one of those journals that I work with. So it's really great to see such a huge number of people here today. So thank you very much for lending us your time, and I hope this will be interesting.
Thank you, Bex. And then just because there's a good amount of people here, we have a poll for you to fill out, to introduce yourself. So I'm going to launch it now. And introductions, launch. Okay, you should see the questions pop up there, just asking what journal you're on, where you are in your career, and then where you're calling in from. I'm still holding out for someone to call in from Antarctica. So I always kind of say this is like popcorn, you know, it's slow to get going and then there's a peak of activity and then they kind of trickle off. All right, so end poll, share results, here we go. All right, let's see. Most people coming in from PLOS pathogens, comp bio, digital health, genetics. Welcome, welcome. Many of you quite far along in your careers, several editorial boards. Didn't get an Antarctica yet. Most people calling in from North America and Europe, making sense on the time. Well, perfect. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for spending your time with us today as we go through these resources. All right, let's get into it. Moving right along. So first, to introduce the editorial boards across the different community journals, as Bex mentioned. So again, I want to point out these pages that you can find here. They all follow a very similar format, but wanted to point this out so that you can see where to find your colleagues on the editorial board. Actually, let's click on PLOS Pathogens since many of you are from this journal. So this webpage syncs directly with Editorial Manager, which is our submission platform and where you'll be doing the bulk of your work. So this has all of your profile information. So if you wanted to look up, say, a colleague of yours that's in the same section or that has the same terminology listed in their profile, you can do that here. So let's say that we wanted to search for bacteria. You can see like here is anyone that has the classification term bacteria in their profile. And you can see also where people are geographically located, and other information about your colleagues on the editorial board. Pointing out the different roles that we have on the editorial boards. So section editors are going to be kind of like the first line of in the editorial chain. So when a submission comes in, it's first evaluated by a section editor, and they have a decision point as to whether to pass it along to you to oversee the peer review process or issue a reject without review decision at that time. So section editors are good to get to know because you'll be collaborating with them on the peer review process and issuing the decisions. And they're the ones that are going to be sending you the invitations as well. So it's important to keep your profile up to date so that they can find you. I'm going to go kind of quickly over these next couple of slides because you will have seen this as part of the recruitment process. But here we have the linked academic editor role, which in summary is overseeing the peer review process. So from the moment that you agree to handle a manuscript as academic editor, all the way through to a final decision, whether that's a reject without review or through the whole peer review process, eventually into an accept decision as well. Next slide here, code of conduct for editorial board members. Publication ethics is something we take very seriously here at PLOS. We have an entire department, very robust and growing department that works on publication ethics in close collaboration with my team and making sure that all editorial board members are adhering to the ethics and standards that we expect. So again, you will have seen this and agreed to this as part of your onboarding process, but make sure that wanted to make sure it's repeated here. And I will say I'm sending out these slides after this, so everything that's linked here, you will get a copy of as well. All right, so getting started in Editorial Manager. If you're on other editorial boards, you may have encountered this submission system before. It's used across different publishers. It's a very, shall we say, I think the nicest thing I've heard is archaic, or legacy, I think was the word that was used. So it's a very basic system. There's not too much you can do in it. It's a little clunky when you get to first get going with it, but then once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy to navigate. But there's a couple of things that I wanted to point out right off the bat in terms of managing your editor profile. So here's a guide that we have for you. This is a navigable guide that kind of just has screenshots of different things that you'll be doing in Editorial Manager. And so importantly, when you first get going, making sure that you know how to log in, also very important, and then updating your profile. So if you go over to the top corner, you'll see your name. And then if you click on that, there's a page that says update my information. And on that page is where you're going to make sure that your contact information is up to date. Very importantly, indicating your areas of expertise. So you'll have the opportunity to, from our PLOS taxonomy, choose the terms that best match your expertise, as well as add any free response keywords that also describe your expertise. And this is very important because this is how section editors find you and how you will be invited to handle manuscripts. So that page that I showed you that lists all of the editorial board members, they'll be able to look in there and look you up by your classification terms and then find you to send you invitations. The other thing I want to point out on this update my information page is, if we go back up here, is this ability to set unavailable dates. So that's at the very bottom of the page. You'll see this little button here that says unavailable dates. And this is where you can indicate if you have a particularly rigorous teaching schedule, or you have an important grant that's due, you're going to be out in the field doing research. For whatever reason, you're unavailable to handle manuscripts. You can put your dates in there. And what's really helpful to us is if you can clarify if you have manuscripts that you're currently handling, maybe they're out with the authors to revise, if you're available to handle that paper when it comes back in from revision. That just helps us get the paper back to you, and ideally having the same editor throughout the peer review process. Okay. Moving right along to our editorial process, this is color coded here. The blue ones are where the section editor is responsible, and then the kind of teal turquoise color is where you are responsible for. So like I mentioned, the paper first comes to a section editor. They have a chance to decide whether to reject or invite academic editors. Here is where that invitation process happens. Let's say you agree, and then the peer review process happens. You write a draft decision letter at the end of that. That then goes back to the section editor to review and then pass along to the authors. And then that process would repeat if the authors do revise their paper and then resubmit it. Okay, getting into what I call the 4 core quick guides. So our intent with these is to have a guide at every decision point that you have in the manuscript handling process. So the very first decision point that you have is when you are invited to handle a manuscript. So these are going to arrive in your inbox as an invitation, and they're very recognizable because it'll always start with like PLOS, journal, invitation to handle, and then a manuscript number. So clicking into this guide here, again, this is meant to just be a visual introduction to what you can expect. And then you'll kind of dig into these resources a little bit later on when you're at those decision points. So starting off with this guide here, this is just an overview of what that invitation will look like. So like I mentioned, it'll be really easy to recognize in your inbox because it'll start all caps PLOS. Then in that invitation itself is meant to be the majority of what you will need in order to make an informed decision as to whether you will want to handle that manuscript or not. Which is something else I would like to clarify too. You are not expected to handle every single invitation that is sent to you. I know some journals just assign papers. That's not how things work here. You have a choice. So if the paper is outside of your expertise or you're not available, you can decline that manuscript. So going into further in the anatomy, we'll have information about the manuscript itself, as well as who authored it, so that you can decide whether you might know these authors or not. We have information about our published peer review history, links to go into Editorial Manager where you can actually download the full submission. Maybe the abstract doesn't give you enough information about deciding whether that paper truly is in your area of expertise or not. And then at the bottom of the paper, or at the bottom of the email, underneath the signature will be the keywords and the abstract of the paper itself. So you can get a pretty good feel for what this paper is about from just that email alone. And then, like I said, you can go into Editorial Manager and learn a little bit more. Calling out a little bit more about how matching works. I've already mentioned that the section editors are the ones that are going to be sending these invitations. And again, it's important to keep your profiles up to date so that they can find you. So they can actually search on the public page, and that's just going to be the PLOS taxonomy terms. But if they go into Editorial Manager, they can search by keywords as well. So if there are any terms that are missing from our taxonomy that really describe your expertise, please do add those as keywords, and then section editors will be able to search the database to find you. Okay, and then here is a guide, an overview table to help you determine whether you would consider handling a manuscript or not. So this here, we're going to go into on the next slide in more detail, but that's our overall peer review timeline generally. That'll help you determine, okay, do I have the time available to handle this manuscript all the way through? And then here we have our table. So you want to consider accepting an invitation to handle a manuscript when you have the time. You're actually available to do this. It is in your area of expertise, of course. A little clarifying point here that we don't expect you to be an absolute perfect expert in every single manuscript that you're invited to handle. But if a paper is generally within your area of expertise and you feel confident that you would be able to invite adequate and appropriate relevant reviewers and then digest their reviews and write an informed decision letter, that is something that you would consider handling. Of course, you have no competing interests. And this other clarifying point here, it's not suitable for peer review. If a paper is in your area of expertise, but it doesn't really look like it's going to be up to muster, and Bex will go into that later on, you can still consider agreeing to handle that manuscript and issuing a reject without review decision. And then declining an invitation is basically the opposite of all of that. Okay, and then we do have some frequently asked questions here at the bottom. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but these are things like I've mentioned already. We do not expect you to handle every single paper that you're invited to. Just some nuances about how invitations work. And then importantly, if you're having any poor experiences with invitations, you can contact my department and we can help kind of tailor your profile a little bit so that you start receiving adequate volume and relevance of invitations. Okay, going back to our slides here. And like I mentioned, this is the slide here on the peer review timeline. So this is going to be day 0 here. So you have an invitation in your inbox. You say, okay, this is great. No competing interests. This is in my area of expertise. I have the time. I'm going to agree to handle this paper. So that starts the clock there. So within 3 days, we expect you to take a look at that paper and then make that initial decision as to whether you're going to send this out for peer review or not. Like I mentioned, you don't have to send every paper out for peer review. You can issue a reject decision at that stage. Okay, let's say that you decide that you do want to send it out for review. You're going to spend about 1 to 2 weeks finding and securing reviewers. And we're going to go into detail about how you'll do that and what to consider. Okay, you've secured reviewers, the reviews have come back. You're going to spend about 2 to 3 weeks digesting those, adjudicating the decisions. If there are some split reviews or what have you, whatever the contents are of those reviews, you're going to digest them and you're going to write your decision letter to the authors, informing them how they can improve their paper. And then that's where that decision is there. So then at the end of that, you issue your decision and then that would repeat. So if you do issue a revised decision, the authors have some time to write their paper and then it comes back and then you keep going until you reach a final decision, whatever that may be. Okay, and with that, I'm actually going to stop my screen share and I'm going to pass it over to Bex, who's going to go into some more of the editorial driven content and resources that you have.
Great, thanks, Dina. I'm hoping everybody has on their screen the slide that Dina just left off from, and I will start driving it instead of clicking other buttons. So thank you so much. That's a really great run-in. What I'm going to be doing is taking us through in that bit more detail through the steps. And thank you so much. Many of you sent in really helpful questions of things that you found challenging as you've been approaching this in your experience so far. What I've tried to do is to incorporate those questions and answers to those questions throughout the different stages. But we will have time for particular questions at the end, and please do use the chat so that we can start to gather those questions as we go through. So here you have your manuscript. It's been assigned. You think that you're the right person to look after this. And the first step really is going to be assessing that manuscript, thinking about doing that work. You're going to need to know stuff about the journal itself. You're going to need to bring your own subject expertise. And the real decision point of this is, do I send this paper out to review, or do I send a reject without review decision to the authors with the relevant information to them to explain why that decision has been made? So we're going to jump to the next one of our quick guides. These ones really are intended to be sort of a one-stop shop, and they do have quite a lot of detail, and they cover all of the journals in the portfolio within this type of journal. So please don't get too overwhelmed. You'll get a chance to dig in. In terms of the initial decision, this is something that we get quite a lot of questions for this particular group of journals, because we are looking for that selectivity. And one of the things that I think is a really important way of thinking about that is, are my colleagues and people that work in this research area going to be interested in the outcomes of this research? If the research question is interesting. So not so much has everything been done, have all of the T's been crossed, has all the controls been used? That would be assessed by the peer reviewers. What you're thinking at the moment is this a research question that is of interest to me and my peers? And if it's been conducted correctly, is this something that I would be interested in reading in the journal? And one way of assessing that is to look at the type of papers that have also been published in the journal before, but it's also your own intrinsic knowledge of the field, where it's at, what's interesting, what's been driving things forward, and what's very well established. What do we already really know in our field? That's probably not the space. These journals are not the space where that work should be published. So that's very journal specific, but it's where we really are relying on the knowledge of your field, and it's why we have such an amazing group of experts that we work with. So I think it's really important to note here that if a manuscript doesn't meet that criteria, if it's not got an interesting research question, if it doesn't fit within the scope of the journal, or if the manuscript hasn't been well conducted, it really is okay to reject without inviting external peer reviewers. You're experts in this field, and this is what we would be relying on you for your insight here. So thinking about rejecting and transferring, obviously PLOS has got 14 different journals. Just because the manuscript that's been submitted by the author isn't the perfect fit for the journal that you're the academic editor for, doesn't mean that the authors can't find a really great home within the portfolio and publish their manuscript using all the principles of open science that we find so important. So if you can see that the manuscript might be a better fit for another journal in the portfolio, that could include PLOS One, it could include one of the other journals within this group that we've been talking about here in terms of subject specificity, or we have other journals that are more field specific, but more inclusive in their publication criteria. So that's PLOS Mental Health, PLOS Climate, PLOS Global Public Health, and PLOS Water, in addition to PLOS One, which obviously is multidisciplinary. So that's when to offer a reject and transfer. If the manuscript really shouldn't be published anywhere, if there are methodological flaws that you've identified and you don't think it's worth transferring, then obviously you can make a reject without review without transfer as well. So things like insufficient sample size, really weak or poor hypotheses, serious methodological flaws, or where you really think that it's just not something that should be receiving a transfer. That's when you just make the reject without transfer recommendation. But hopefully the manuscripts that you're seeing have passed through our technical checks and are suitable for transfer somewhere within the PLOS portfolio. And obviously there's the other choice. This looks good for us. I'm interested. I'm going to send it out to peer review. There is a third way. If you're looking at this manuscript and you're like, half of this is my wheelhouse, or I know this bit about it, but maybe I'm not so sure about that part. You really can use the section editors. The section editors have got a much broader remit than the academic editors. They're expected to have a wider oversight of a large section of the journal. You can open a discussion, and there's information in another guide, with the guide to editorial manager there, that explains how to open a discussion. And you can ask the section editor for their advice. You can explain why you're interested, but what's causing you pause before sending it out to review. And it's a really great opportunity to really nuance that decision about whether to send something out to review. We know our academic editors yourselves are very busy, but so are peer reviewers, and many of you wear the same different hats and know it's difficult to find the time to do a really careful peer review. So taking the time to really decide if it's the right decision to send it out to review in the first place is really time well spent. And with that, we go back to our main presentation. And this actually is the area where we have seen the most questions. It's the area where we see the most questions coming back when we do our annual survey of academic editors that you will get invited to later on in the year. It's finding and securing peer reviewers. You've decided you want to review it, you think it's interesting, the research questions inspired you to seek this expert review, but now what? So I think this is, yet again, another quick guide, maybe slightly less quick. There's a little bit more to this one, so excuse me as I go through it. First up, who's a suitable reviewer? So a suitable reviewer is someone who can provide an insightful and unbiased perspective on that manuscript that will help us decide whether it's appropriate to accept and publish in the journal, or if it needs particular modifications by the authors, or if it shouldn't be published in this journal. So reviewers should have the right technical expertise. You need to have somebody who can fully understand the type of experiments that the authors have done to answer their research question. You often need somebody who has expertise in the research question itself, the area of the field. It may not be fully in your wheelhouse, and you need to find somebody who has that holistic overview, who can give that insight of, is this research question as really as interesting as it seemed on first read of the abstract and first looking through the manuscript? Or, maybe it's something that's actually slightly more well established and may not be as suitable for the journal as initially thought. Manuscripts really do need to be evaluated by external reviewers. As an academic editor, you are not a reviewer on the manuscript yourself. If you're providing feedback to the authors, that would be as the editor within the decision letter, not as a peer reviewer. You're really looking to have 3 external reviewers. And as a general rule, you're looking for reviewers who can provide that level of insight. Some ways of thinking about that can be that they've published around 5 papers on the specific area of interest. Do they have expertise in the research area? You may just know that they do. Usually somebody who's going to be able to provide the level of insight that we're looking for has got a postdoctoral degree, and they're usually affiliated with an academic, government, not-for-profit, some kind of research institution or a company where they can be found and where their research is accountable. It's really important to avoid competing interests and to avoid biased perspectives. It's really important to think, has this author of the manuscript got a close relationship with the person that I'm going to be inviting? The reviewers will be asked to declare this as well, but it's really important as you're looking through somebody's published history. Are you seeing co-publications cropping up between the authors of the manuscript you're handling and that potential reviewer? It can happen very often. It's very easily done. And it's obviously people who've worked with the author can show up as being great experts in the field, but it's really important to have somebody who can provide that unbiased perspective. The other thing is thinking about, do they work at the same institution as the authors? Are they likely to be having a coffee together very often? The other thing is that at PLOS, we do offer our authors the opportunity to list opposed reviewers who might be conflicted in ways that are less apparent to somebody who doesn't know the field. Wherever possible, we do abide by those requests. So please do check it out. It will be in the details of the manuscript. You'll be able to see these people and have a look and see who they are so that you don't invite them to review this manuscript. We usually use a cutoff of around 5 years to consider that somebody's been working closely with somebody still in terms of their co-publications. That's not a hard and fast rule. If somebody did their PhD in somebody else's lab, then they're probably still got an ongoing relationship even after 5 years. This is where the knowledge of networks that you have can play a really strong part. But also, again, we do ask the reviewers these questions, and they do need to be held accountable for declaring their own competing interests as well. And yes, the other thing, and this is also can be difficult to do, because we all know that there are some institutions that are just particularly strong in a particular field, and you can ultimately find people who are working in different labs at that institution who have different perspectives on the same kind of problems. It is important, though, to make sure that you have a range of reviewers from different perspectives, from different institutions, so that they can provide that additional nuance, and there's no danger of having a groupthink around the peer review. It's about getting the insight that you need to make that nuanced decision when you come to make it. So this is one of the areas where we know it can be really challenging. When we've asked our editorial boards to provide us with tips for things that work for them when they're looking for reviewers, the top one is researchers they know. They know you, they're more likely to say yes. This is something to use sparingly, because obviously you don't want to tap out your network with lots of requests for manuscripts that may or may not be of interest to them. So think about whether they're going to really care about the content, whether they're going to be interested to read it, and also maybe hold back some of those invitations for some of those manuscripts that are maybe a little bit more difficult to find reviewers for in the general pool. Researchers whose work you know, say you've been to a conference and you've seen somebody speak really inspirationally about something, that's a really great opportunity for you to connect with that person and tell them why. I saw you at this presentation. I think this paper would align really much with your interests. It's a great opportunity to increase your personal network. Tell the person why you find the connection with their work and the paper that you're seeking to review is relevant and much more likely to have somebody say yes. So I think these are things that it is beneficial to take that extra minute and tailor the invitation to the person that you're sending it to, because then they know why you're interested, why you think they'd be interested in the manuscript, and it's going to be much more engaging all round. Then there's the broader tools. Within EM, there is the Web of Science Reviewer Locator tool. That provides a list of suggested reviewers based on the information that's provided in the metadata of the manuscript and the keywords that reviewers have been assigned by Web of Science. Again, it's really important to run through, are they biased? Are they at the same institution as the authors? All of these types of things before clicking them through. They present themselves quite easily and it's quite easy to add them. So definitely it's really important to sort of engage that thought process while you're doing the activity in terms of adding the reviewers. Outside of EM, there are a bunch of different databases. We've got a few of them listed here. You can use the one that you're most familiar with to find research articles, to also find people. And the reference list of the article can also be a really strong place to find relevant research, although often people cite work that they have been associated with, so just be a bit careful with the competing interests aspect. Broader tips, early career researchers can be really strong methodological peer reviewers. They're the ones who are doing the actual bench work or the research. And so they quite often will know what the ideal controls are, what type of experiments the authors could have done or should have done in order to really make sure that the research is robust. So definitely do think about, and they also often have time. They're enthusiastically reading around their subject. They might be more interested to read a manuscript before it's been published, and to have that additional nuance of, I found it interesting. If the paper's been pre-printed, that sort of filter of you as an academic editor finding the manuscript interesting and ready for somebody to be assessing is some additional way of identifying what they should be spending their time reading. I've noted before, personalizing that invitation template. If you've invited someone for a particular reason, tell them. It's going to make them much more likely to say yes. And within EM, you can set up alternative reviewers. So if somebody says no, someone is immediately promoted into that slot, an invite goes out. It means we don't swamp the world with lots of invitations that aren't needed. But it means that when you're engaging with that manuscript for the first time, if you put about 8 different people in, they will gradually get worked through, and you've engaged with it, you've thought about the process, you've done your searches all at once, and it's just a very efficient way of doing the work. And finally, I would say that one thing that is an option, and also for yourselves when you're asked to review, is co-reviewing with someone who's a potentially more junior researcher who might not get these invitations and have these opportunities to engage in research in this way. It can be a really nice training opportunity. And as the academic editor, you get that insight from the more senior PI alongside the early career researcher who's maybe doing more of the research. There is a really nice video here on how to use the free dimensions tool if you've never had a chance to explore that. So again, that's within the quick tips. And it is important, as I referred to at the beginning, to have that set of different perspectives when you're looking at assessing research. Do avoid going repeatedly to a small number of reviewers. They won't thank you for it, but also it's better for research as a whole if we're spreading this assessment around. It is tempting to just ask the person down the hall at your institution. Again, that's fine, but do not do that very often, and only one person per paper. And there are these additional databases outside of Editorial Manager that will expand that. We know it's busy. We know it's hard. It's really important to aim to start inviting these reviewers as soon as you can. We do find that we expect it takes about an hour using all the systems that I've outlined to find 8 reviewers. Hopefully, and if you found the right 8 and they're not busy, that can be the job done. The people take things up and they can move on, and you're moving on to the next stage of the manuscript process. But do be sure to check your email and make sure that the emails are coming through to you. You will be told when somebody says yes and when somebody says no. So then you can engage back in again as you need and when you have time to add some more reviewers if needed. There are some really helpful Q&As. I don't want to go through in depth here. I think I've sort of touched on most of these things. One of the things that we do frequently get asked, though, is that 14 days is a really short turnaround time for reviewers. And this is true. People are very busy. What we have found is that when we just blanket extend those deadlines, we don't actually get a big increase in people saying yes. We do get a big increase in people submitting their reviews after a very long time. So we've kept it at 14 days, but it's within your remit to offer an extension as you send that invite out. I wouldn't recommend extending it much beyond 21 days unless you have a particular reason, say it's a holiday season in the area that you're recruiting reviewers from, or you know that there's somebody that you really need and they're away on field work at the moment, something like that. The system is set up to support you. It sends out reminders to reviewers. It gets everything moving and sending through to you. So I still have another slide to get through, and I want to make sure we have time for questions. So let's assume that has now all gone really smoothly, and you have got 3 to 4 really great and insightful peer reviews from people who you know why you asked their advice, and now you're going to be looking to see what to do with the manuscript. Excuse me. So I think the first thing to say is peer review is not a vote-taking exercise. It's really important to engage with the nuance of the peer review comments. And if, for example, you have 3 accept recommendations and 1 reject recommendation, but the reject is from somebody who's an expert in a particular area and they've identified a fatal flaw in the manuscript, that the whole manuscript relies on this particular experiment. They're the expert in that experiment and they say it's not been conducted properly. That's the most important piece of information that's been shared with you. The 3 people who thought the research question was really interesting from their perspective, but didn't have that technical expertise, that's great. Hopefully it will allow the authors to make some revisions and maybe consider doing the experiments differently. But at this point, the manuscript can't proceed any further with the journal. So the other thing as an academic editor that you have an opportunity to do is to really think what of the peer review comments really need to be addressed for the manuscript to be suitable for the journal, and what might be unnecessary or potentially for the next project for this set of authors to be thinking about. So thinking about the expertise of the reviewers while you're reading it, as you're reading through, think about which of these comments really are necessary to address. And then there are also opportunities to get back to the reviewers to ask specific questions to add clarity as well. It's really important, though, that you don't edit the reviewer comments directly. You will have the opportunity to give your nuance within the letter that is sent. There are some common peer review situations in our editor's guide to adjudicating decisions. So you can look through that and it gives you some kind of guidance of the way this may have been approached previously. But also there's your section editor. So there's always the opportunity to open a discussion with the section editor, outline what your thinking is. This is what the reviewers have recommended. I'm leaning towards this type of decision. What do you think? Does that align with other decisions that have been made at the journal? Is that consistent editorial decision making? These kinds of things the section editors can really help you with. They see a lot more decisions than you will. They're looking at this in a more high-level, holistic way, and they can really provide some really important guidance. And if they need additional advice, they can come to us internally at PLOS if that may be a research integrity issue, or they can consult with the editors-in-chief as well. So thinking about the options at this point, with the information you've got 5 choices really at this point. You can request the authors to make a major revision. This gives them 60 days to revise their manuscript and send it back in for further consideration. So this is where there are some substantive issues that have been raised by the reviewers or that you have noticed. But you think that if the authors are able to address these and you believe it's probably technically possible, if they do it, you would be interested in further considering this manuscript. That's the point at which you invite that major revision. Minor revision is usually more for small changes, textual updates, more nuance needed, and they have 30 days to make those changes. You'd expect that to only involve a minor amount of experimental work to be able to fit that in within that time frame. Obviously you can accept the manuscript. That's great news for everybody. But that means that the manuscript is ready for publication exactly as is. It is wildly unusual for that to be the first decision that is rendered on a manuscript, in large part because there's usually some changes that are needed to abide by policies and other aspects, even if by some chance all of the reviewers were satisfied in the first round. The 2 reject options that we discussed before, where it was possible to make the decisions before review, are still available to you after review. Reject and transfer if the manuscript isn't going to be able to meet the requirements for the journal that you're academic editor for, but with changes might be able to be published elsewhere in a PLOS journal. That's the recommendation to make. The reviews travel with the manuscript, so this is a great benefit for the authors that they're starting from a place where they've already got all that assessment and they're bringing all of that information with them. Or reject, if it's simply a case of the challenges with the manuscript are sufficient that it shouldn't be published. That's the decision that should be made. These R numbers are the numbers that will appear after the manuscript number once it's been revised. You'll see that on the manuscript in EM. And this is what happens when the revised version comes into your inbox. At this point, it may be that you can look through the rebuttal from the authors to the peer reviewer comments and say, actually, this is in a really great shape now. Happy to take this one forward. I don't need to consult with the peer reviewers because actually this is sufficiently within my expertise that I'm able to make a decision on this manuscript. Equally, if you can look through things and say, this isn't sufficiently revised, I'm not happy with this, you can send it back to the authors for further revisions at this point without consulting reviewers. Otherwise, and you need the insight from the reviewers, then you invite back the original reviewers. Again, you don't have to invite back all of them. It's just the reviewers whose technical expertise you need to be able to make the decision on the next steps of the manuscript. And then, if necessary, you can invite another revision. You go back to all of the decisions that are available above. But I would suggest that it's better not to have more than 2 rounds of review, to use that editorial decision making and really make that decision whether it's going to be suitable for the journal or not. Authors want to get their papers published in a reasonable time frame, and it's usually better to make the decision, yes or no, as early as the information is available to you. When you're making that decision back to the authors, it's really important to provide that information in the decision letter. I always try to remember how it feels to get that insight back myself. There's a person on the end of this, so we try to provide constructive feedback so that they can improve their manuscript, whether the decision is reject or whether it is to hopefully revise that manuscript for further consideration at the journal. You can give context to the reviews. You can say which of the points that have been raised by the reviewers are most important to you to be addressed and how you would like to see those addressed. You can also comment to the authors where a particular section of a reviewer's comments aren't necessary to address either within the manuscript or experimentally. Do remember that the reviewers will receive a copy of this as well. So keep your comments collegial. And if you do need to reject a manuscript, be clear about the reasons for it. This is really helpful to the authors in when they're making their next decision about what to do with their manuscript. Yeah, next. In terms of these expectations, it really is best for authors if the same person is making these assessments from submission through to final decision. So if you don't think that you're going to be able to have the space to do that, it's better to actually decline the invitation in the first instance than to have lots of manuscripts changing ownership in terms of the academic editor at multiple stages of the timeline. It's not a nice experience as an editor to be asked to pick these things up, but it's also the consistency for authors can be really helpful. Any publication ethics concerns, there are multiple paths that can be taken. The first instance is to send an email into the journal inbox. We have specialist teams who can provide publication ethics advice. We have specialist teams who can look for things like dual use research concerns. We have whole systems and policies in-house to support you there. So you will not be left alone. And it's definitely something we want to hear about. Research integrity is the absolute most important thing for us. If you have any concerns at all, let us know. We will help you look into it and we will come to a resolution. And we have the legal team and we have the ethics team to really support that. On occasion, journal staff will conduct a review of decisions. You may then get feedback about how best to approach future assignments. This is always taken in the context of improving transparency and making sure that we have a whole system that is abiding by our editorial code of conduct and by the COPE recommendations. I noted it before, but it's worth reminding. Authors can opt in to publish their peer review history. For PLOS, that means the letters that you send as an editor are part of that published package. So really think about that as you're sending this information out. This is information that will have your name on it, and it could be published with a DOI. And again, reviewers do receive a copy of that decision letter. And with that, I believe I hand back to you, Dina.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Bex, very much. And my role here is to wrap everything up and remind you that you do not need to memorize absolutely everything that we covered here today, and then where to find these resources going forward. So again, I'm going to use PLOS pathogens as our example here, but every page linked here follows very much the same format. So we have these resources pages where you can find everything we mentioned today. If you kind of scroll down, our little side navigation bar will pop out here, and it's organized around these quick guides. So like I said, every guide is meant to meet you when you have a decision to make. So you can find those here, and as well as additional links to resources that are helpful along the peer review process. So all of that is going to be found there. And then of course, like who to contact if you run into any trouble. So the journal office is going to be your main go-to if you have questions about particular manuscripts that you're handling, or any of those more administrative things like needing extensions or anything along those lines. All of the journal emails are listed here. And then if you have any questions about your role more generally, or like I mentioned, you're experiencing weird things with invitations, or eventually you do need to resign, my team's contact information is there at boardsupport@plos.org. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop screen share again, and we're going to go into the Q&A portion. And there's already been some in chat that I would like to call out. Bex, this one is going to be for you, and this is from Vitali. I'm just going to read it out here. So it says, how do we address overinterpretation of the results in a paper? Technically, a paper could be fine, but what the results mean can be drastically dependent on an individual, and there's tendency of hyping results. How do we address this?
So this is something where there's that opportunity within the decision letters to provide additional editorial nuance. I almost always, whenever something has the word first or novel written in a manuscript, that almost always gets my attention for something that's going to need changing. Apart from anything else, it's very, very unusual, and you don't know the whole universe of published literature. So there's no need for that. Like your work can stand on its own feet. And this is what I would normally say to an author, to please remove all the claims of primacy from your manuscript. The research question that you've outlined is something that we're interested in at the journal, and it's not necessary to provide this hype. We're looking for a nuanced assessment of the outcomes that you have observed and what you think that can offer going forwards. So that's something where, as an editor, you're really empowered to provide the authors with that guidance to ensure that their research is being reported in that nuanced and careful way that we all look for when we're assessing literature. So that yes, we do see it quite often. The whole requirement to add the model organism into the title to not give the impression that something's been assessed in patients when it's been assessed in mice. All of these types of things, we know reviewers are looking out for them as well. But if, as an editor, you can keep this in mind, that this careful reporting is something that we really do want to encourage, and to provide some of that insight when you're sending those decision letters, this is one area where, yeah, as an editor, you're really empowered to make a really positive change to the literature and the way research is reported. I hope that answers the question.
There's a couple of other, oh, sorry, go ahead, Vitaly, I
Well,
see.
I mean, it does answer in simple ways. Like, I guess the gray area part is more complicated. But you just mentioned like first or unique, fine. These are simple. Often it's more nuanced than that. And that's an opinion of a debate. Authors could still say no, but this is how we interpret it. And you say, well, you cannot interpret because there's these alternatives that you have not considered. And it could it could be more nuanced. Like, it's not like simple solutions are simple. And then the complex solutions are more. So what you said is involve other editors and see, but that's going to delay again. People have to read the paper. Those editors have to go through it, see and nobody has the time. So kind of, I think that's in a lot of cases that's a problematic thing, that I've seen that a lot. People really, what they say, it's not actually what they did or what it means. And it's nuanced again. It's much more nuanced than what you like, just examples that you made, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, for those nuanced cases, I think that then that's when you do need to bring the nuance. And honestly, I think sometimes those more complex, nuanced cases do end up taking that bit longer and do need additional insight. I mean, it isn't a vote-taking exercise, and I do think genuinely there is a real role for the academic editors to have that final say. Particularly, quite often you see that this is a discussion. As an editor, you see that this is a kind of discussion that's happening between one or two reviewers and the authors, where the reviewers are saying something's been overstated, the authors are saying, no, this is what this means, this is absolutely cast iron, guaranteed, perfect, and this is how it is. Usually, as you say, there's nuance, and it's not either one is completely correct. And the outcome that I would hope for as a senior member of PLOS is that you are able to get that nuance into the manuscript. And if you can't, sometimes you do have to say to authors that unfortunately this isn't the journal for you, because we can't publish this if it's not fully supported by the data that's in the manuscript. Sometimes that causes a bit of a change of thinking and the nuance appears in the manuscript. But I do agree with you. It's not a role of an editor does require quite a lot of intellectual engagement with the content and with the reviewer reports. And it hopefully is quite a stimulating role because of that, but it can be quite time consuming, and we do really appreciate that.
All right, I'm typing out an answer to Clarence's question here. Let's see. I didn't hear anything. Okay, I'm going to Shirazu's question. I didn't hear anything on technical note, especially from developing countries, which are mostly useful to researchers in that category. I'm not sure I understand this question. Shirazu, are you able to come off mute? Okay, I'm going to jump over then to some questions that were pre-submitted ahead of time. Let's see. I feel like we've addressed this one a bit. It was a question about how PLOS handles suspected cases of scientific misconduct. We both touched on our publication ethics department that investigates both pre and post publication situations. I'm going to jump to this question here. This one's for you, Bex. Is there a typical average rejection rate before sending to review?
It's really variable by journal. At PLOS 1, for example, it's around 38%. At some of our other titles here, we're looking at more like 50 to 60% of manuscripts that get rejected without review. For PLOS biology, it's more like 80%. So it does very much depend on the scope of the journal and the research that then gets submitted to it. So I would say that it's kind of interesting to know, but I'm not sure that it's informative. If you're getting 6 manuscripts a year, I wouldn't be expecting to use that kind of crude statistics in terms of informing decision making.
Does anyone else have a question? Okay, I'm conscious of time. I do want to read out one last question that was pre-submitted ahead of time because I think this is helpful in setting expectations. The question was, what are the top 2 challenges for current editorial board members? So I run a survey every year, and across the board, the top 2 challenges are the same across all of the journals. And that is finding and securing reviewers and out of expertise invitations. So I do want to set the stage for those 2 challenges that probably you will experience as part of this role. The securing reviewers one being a big one. It's just challenging when you're asking people to commit a lot of time to review a paper. So please don't get discouraged. It is a thing you will experience, but there are people out there who are interested and willing to review. We just need to find them. And then the out of expertise invitations, I invite you to be a participant in this process and make sure that your profile is up to date so that as much as possible, the section editors can find the appropriate papers for you, and that please, again, decline any invitations that are outside of your area of expertise. Okay, I just want to end. I'm going to go back to the slides really briefly just to kind of wrap everything up and again, remind you where to find us. Cool. So I do encourage you to reach out to us at any time if you are experiencing any issues with manuscripts or with your role more generally. We are on social media. We've recently gone over to Blue Sky, so you can find PLOS there, and on LinkedIn if you're on that platform. And then one last nod that in addition to serving as the adjudicator of the scientific literature and improving the papers that come to our journals. You are an ambassador for PLOS and the journal itself. So we appreciate you going out into your world and saying nice things about PLOS. And please let us know if there's anything we can do to support you in your role. And I wanted to thank you for, I'm gonna stop the recording now.